Ladies and gentlemen and variations thereof, welcome to the Selectives Lorecast, a casual Elder Scrolls podcast. My name is Rotten Deadite, and with me today are...
Zels, otherwise known as Zels.
And I'm James, also known as Aramithius.
And, good choice, Baka. And so today we're doing Volume 2 of the Truth in Sequence. We've actually managed to finish one yesterday, or last one.
Last time, yeah.
And this one's relatively short.
Yeah.
Actually, from here on out, with a couple of exceptions like 8, they're all relatively brief. That doesn't mean we're not going to take forever to do this. But,
yes.
One of the reasons is we're going to start off with the will of Sotha Sil is the chrononymic will. So we get to talk about nymics again.
Yep.
Now, ESO has differentiated a number of different types of nymics. Which is appropriate considering how important they are in the Elder Scrolls universe, but also appropriate because of the wide range of detailed magic systems that ESO has decided to explore in lore, because everybody's got a different way of casting Fireball, and so, hence we have a lot of books, in-game books written about magic from a lot of different, culture. So we already know about the neonymic from the commentaries on the Mysterium Xarxes, the idea of creating a new... So the idea of a nymic being sort of like if you're familiar with D&D, a demon's true name or whatever, or a person's true name, a wizard sometimes have these.
That was also there in Battlespire, where you could find Molag, but was it Molag? Yeah. No, it was Mokbal's. It was Dagon's true name.
It was Dagon in
yeah. And it was just a keyboard mash.
Yeah. But you do find something called a chrononymic of Molag Bal, I think, in ESO.
Yeah.
No, Mehrunes Dagon, apparently. Yep. And I remember doing that quest, and I remember thinking, I should write down what the chrononymic is.
Yeah.
And I did not. Probably it's somewhere on a website somewhere. But if I recall correctly, I was listening to it while they were reciting it, and it didn't pop out to me. I don't think it was Rumpelstiltskin, no. It didn't really pop out at me as being a particularly... like, I didn't recognize any Elnofex or anything in it. So there's no guarantee that there's actual meaning behind whatever it was in ESO, but it wouldn't surprise me at all if there was. It wouldn't surprise me at all if somebody sat down and tried to figure something. It's been suggested that there's a thing called the egonymic, which apparently only Daedric princes can possess, which is a more powerful version of a nymic. When we talk about nymics from an identity standpoint, we're talking about a word or a name or a label, a title that is supposed to encapsulate everything that this being is. So when Mehrunes Dagon rewrote his own nymic, he changed the very fundamental basic nature of what he was. So if you have something like an egonymic, you might suggest that like the ego suggests will, so you could possibly argue that an egonymic would be the identity that a Daedric prince creates for himself, like willingly, of his own. Neverwinter Nights 1, Hordes of the Underdark, last chapter. Okay. Yeah, Baka, if I recall correctly, the D&D name magic was mostly about, like, forcing an entity to do something. Is that fair?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So summoning a creature to a demon of some kind or whatever to show up in your, to be in your presence and to obey your commands. That's how it's used, but the lore is way deeper. That's good.
It's that's just been a principle of real world magical practice for a good while. So
that's a cornerstone of ceremonial magic.
So Daedric clans are known to have protracted tribonymics, which are never spoken or revealed lest they be used as a weapon against them. So again, very similar. Yep. Chrononymics are the classifications that Daedra use for each other, such as names or title. So that kind of sounds a little bit more like an honorific. And hieronymic just kind of sounds like a, I don't know, Vec speech kind of, yeah, like Vecian speech, you know, just like here's a fancy word for something that probably doesn't need it. Harmonic astronymics is an ancient Dwemer text which seemingly deals with the constellations and how to harness their power. So that kind of like, I would think that we could probably draw a line between Nimics and tonal architecture, tonal magic, but
well, they're both sort of designed to get to the core of a thing. So that's why they are the way they are. There, it's all just coming down to mucking about with something's true identity again.
Yeah,
in Baka, the Infinite sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
In the Infinite Archive, Thoat is the main protagonist, of course, and Thoat is from Miramor. She's one of Athelia's scions. But during the spell, when Mora made everybody forget Athelia, Thoat gets turned into vivified ink and becomes part of the books. And then, so she's coming as Athelia gets remembered. Thoat is able to regain her shape, and so she is manifesting herself through the ink of the books. But then, when you kill her, she isn't ink; she is a pile of glass shards. And the way that you defeat her is you have to summon her by gathering her nimics. And there's a point where one of the little filers explains, Master Malcast calls these something nimics, but they're actually proto-nimics, just so you know. And I've always thought that the proto-nimic part is that we're calling back to Thoat's original name, that is her original form as a shardborn, as opposed to this vivified ink that she was turned into.
Right. Yeah, the idea of being the first name that you're given.
Yeah.
Or possibly, do you think that could be like a label for how a being was before, like at the very first instance that they were created?
Possibly, yeah.
Well, then that would almost suggest that a proto-nimic is something else from that.
Yeah,
I would assume that sort of thing was a proto-nimic.
Yeah, me too. So anyway, there was hi Wayne, thank you for your sub, tier 1, 48 months, doing great.
That's woo.
That's a long time.
Yeah, 4 years.
4 years, man. Yeah.
You put up with enough from us. You really do.
So the will of Sotha Sil is the chrononymic will, the nameless will. Could a chrononymic be something that survives their whole existence? Oh.
Something that is dependent, is not dependent on time, or a name that is representative of the being through time. I'm kind of getting flashes of kind of a name that functions like those Donnie Darko streams of a being.
Oh, okay.
Thing.
So if a Daedra is unchanging, usually, could a chrononymic be something that's specific to immortals, since they're going to be evolving over time and they would be different at the beginning than they would be at the end, and the chrononymic would encompass all that?
Yeah, it would be something that's because it's something that has some degree of independence, because if you look at the next sentence, it talks about a nameless will, and for what is name, the name is the wedge that pries gear from pinion. It implies that that a chrononymic is something that's connected to something that is unchanging, that is far more eternal than a state of being or a name or anything like that, which is also really weird in the context of nimics, because nimics are names. So it's kind of a chrononymic is a name that is an identifier that is not a name. It's something that is entirely devoid of any kind of name type markers, yet still consists of a form of identity.
Yeah. Something that is something that it changes over time, or something that represents something that changes over time?
I think the second one.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, the chrononymic that they use to banish whoever it was, Dagon, I think we said. Yeah,
Mhm.
is a series of several words. So it's not just one
Yeah,
long continuous ululation of
yeah,
it's of a tone or something.
yeah. It's
Um,
it's a thing that will not. It's a thing that will not change. That is somehow eternal.
yeah, and that makes
Um,
sense if a
yeah.
chrononymic is a chrononymic will is a nameless will.
Yes.
So it says, so it continues, for what is name, in quotes. The divine metronome tells us that name is the wedge that pries gear from pinion,
Ooh.
Ah.
the residue of Lorcan's great
It's,
lie that loosens the wheel chain and corrodes the frame.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I I have thoughts on gear and pinion, which may
Yep.
give us something towards
Mm-hmm.
chrononymic. It's the idea that a name is a wedge that pries gear from pinion. A name is a representation of something rather than the thing in itself, and so it's the difference between the symbol of a thing and a thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's treating names like synecdoches, which they're not.
Mm-hmm.
If that makes sense. You're saying
Well,
like if you refer to say rotten deadite,
yeah.
then that is both that is not you, but it's claiming to represent the whole of you. It's a thing that is not you that is claiming to represent the whole of you.
Okay.
It's also potentially a part of you, which is where I was getting the whole synecdoche thought from.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so name being the wedge that pries gear from pinion, it's also about the limitations of language, that how can you ever sum anything up
Yeah.
within words.
Mm-hmm.
So in order to name something is to restrict it, to tie it down to a contingent set of variables and so on,
Mm-hmm.
which is also something that this text doesn't really seem to like. This idea of limitation
Mm-hmm.
and being contained and so on is not something that is a good thing. So having something again that is both a name, that is some kind of name or name function or name type function that doesn't do those things, strikes me as something that is a goal here for something. So to have identity without name and identity without description, and
Yeah.
those sorts of thing. Um,
I also. Oh, sorry. I thought you were.
yeah,
I'm sorry.
yeah. I was about done.
I also think that it's part of because the residue of Lorcan's great lie, um, the idea that the spirits are separate from each other.
Right.
The idea
Mm-hmm.
of a name, my name makes me different than you. And that isn't the ideal here. The ideal is that all of the gears are working together and that they aren't separate things that function independently.
Yeah.
So
Uh,
the name is the thing that keeps all of the individual souls
it creates individuality. Yeah.
right, exactly,
Yeah.
as opposed to being a function of a greater machine.
Well, the way, so Owain asks, aren't there two kinds of time in the Elder Scrolls lore, like one like universe time and one mundus time? Um, it depends on who you ask. I get the impression that a lot of people in universe, a lot of sources will say that Aetherius certainly exists in a sort of state of all time where everything that that can happen is happening or has happened. It's there's no past or future. It's just present.
Mm-hmm.
And that in Oblivion, nothing happens. And then you can, but then like according to like the Vivekian kind of definition of a Newick and Patamaic energy, you could argue that in Oblivion everything is happening, and in Aetherius nothing is happening.
Mm-hmm.
And the real, I think, actual meaning is somewhere a combination of those two things. If you can imagine everything happening so that nothing happens, and then nothing happening so that everything can happen, then you get this weird sort of, I don't know, mind job of a concept, and I think that's probably closer to the truth. So when you ask like are there two kinds of time? I think there's only one thing you can call time in the Elder Scrolls universe, and that's mundus.
Mm-hmm.
And then in all other higher dimensions, time exists as a much wider, more abstract idea. However, there has also been some documents that talk about events happening in Aetherius where there are like beginnings and ends and stuff happens, which is a very contradictory in that respect. And that's why I say it depends on who you ask. because we've got some contradicting information.
Yeah, the accounts that I know are basically that if you look at the Anuad, it talks about Anu and Padme. They came into the void and time began, is the way that that's phrased. Then you've also got most versions of the monomyth will say that that time became a thing when Akatosh was formed.
Right.
And so that implies that firstly there was a time there was a sort of a time before everything got ordered, because there was a time before Akatosh. Akatosh isn't the highest order of being, and that sort of thing. So that's, I think, where the idea of sort of Mundus time comes from, because that it is subject to Akatosh in some way. But if time was created when Akatosh was formed, that means there's also time in Aetherius, because there is a time when Akatosh was around when Mundus wasn't.
Right.
So there is some degree of flex there, and you've also got, if you look at the Red Guard,
it's like time never didn't exist.
It all seems to sort of happen, and the Far Shores was a time originally. It was just the time between Kalpas. So it's a flexible thing. I think that I think time, insofar as extramundial dimensions is concerned, has a looser relationship with causality, is probably the strongest thing we can say about it.
Yeah, that it's timey-wimey. Yeah, things happen sort of roughly before, but maybe not exactly. It's just hard to say.
Yeah,
I also think. Oh, sorry.
It's a case of A can happen before B, but B is not a universal referent in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah. And part of the reason for that comes from Haskell's Lore Master Archive, where Haskell, it's quite clear that individual princes impose their own notion of time on their own realms. Which sounds like the kind of thing they should be able to do.
Also, we always get explanations or descriptions of those realms and everything that happens on Nirn, and your past references to stories about Aetherius. All of those things are being filtered to us through mortal stories. Mortals must impose linear time in order to be able to either talk about something or understand it. So it may not be that the things in Aetherius had beginnings and ends, but that when the mortal was telling the story, they had to frame it that way. I'm also really fascinated by how this plays into the MMO thing, because in MMO, we as players experience it in linear time as the different chapters come out, but trying to write a story about it, everything is going on at the same time, and our characters are experiencing linearly, but there's still this whole spiral thing happening where it's all at once.
And you could do things before other people did them, and you can complete quests that happen like before somebody else does. There's a thing that's happening in World of Warcraft right now where I've got a character. It's not the same universe, but obviously, but I've got my character needs to go talk to somebody, and then if I look to the right of the person who told me to go talk to them, that person is standing there, the person I need to talk to, but I can't talk to them there. I have to fly to a completely different zone and talk to them there, and I'm like, they're right here. All I have to do is tap them on the shoulder and go, hey man, do you want to talk about that thing? But no, I gotta fuck off to this other corner of the planet to talk to them. And so I like to think of it as like time is broken in World of Warcraft right now. Your friend asks you to go to move, you go on a 2-month vacation, he's still waiting for you to help him. So I want to bring attention to the way that this is described as the wedge that pries the gear from pinion, the residue of Lorkhan's great lie that loosens the wheel chain and corrodes the frame. This sounds like destruction to me. This sounds like names are breaking apart a system.
Names are tools of Sithis.
Okay, well, if that's the case, then it sounds like the assignment of names is dismantling that Lorkhan's great lie or whatever is dismantling is dismantling the structure of the world,
Yes.
Well, Well, it goes back to the original, Anu and Padme, and then Anu wanted to see himself and so split off, and now there's a new name. And then that spirit wants to examine himself and splits off, and now there's a new name. And there keep being new names and new names and new names, and every new name is a new split and a lesser version of something. I think the overall, I keep thinking of communism when I listen to this particular priest. Like everything with him is, we all need to work in harmony. We need to work as one unit. We need to be as unified as possible, and lose our individuality. And I think it's a fascinating way. And of course, so much of Elder Scrolls magic is based on unity rather than division.
Yeah.
So
Yes, I don't know whether this sort of thing would go into sort of Spinoza philosophy. I don't know if we're really at a point for that yet, but it's the idea of there is only one substance in the world, but there are different shapes of that substance.
Mm-hmm.
And that's about as close to a summary of it as I can get. I can pull up the text, but it's going to be thoroughly impenetrable.
Yeah, let's modern people all just consider the single electron theory, and none of you computer code people have unity division computer. Yeah. Well, So our lessers see this as a kind. The Atata gears named each in their way. So it's a suggestion that the Atata created names for things. Our lessers see this as a kindness, but the mainspring Everwound calls it a curse, rooted in selfish pride. To name is to cleave one from another. We were just discussing that. It is the death of Anuic convergence and the Nirn ensuing. The misassembled dragon that breathes dry falsehood and whose name is multitude. All right, so misassembled dragon that like UESP wants to suggest that this is Akatosh. I think it's probably safe to say that.
Yeah.
But that Akatosh's name is multitude.
Well, that kind of fits into some of the things that, at least in with Etada Eat the Dreamer, the way that's presented, the idea of Akatosh being insane and splintered because Akatosh is all time at once. And so Akatosh cannot but be insane because Akatosh is present and past and future, and everything that implies for a single being that is that. I don't think that's quite what's being got at here, because it talks about multitude and just being lots of things rather than lots of time frame references. And it's about the world being that schizophrenic whole, if I can put it that way. If
you're a schizophrenic hole.
It is sort of leaning into the idea of kind of Chim from the world's perspective, that that the world cannot self-actualize because it's in so many pieces, just as it's difficult for an individual to self-actualize using Chim because it considers itself a distinct unit from everything when it's not.
Exactly.
And that's sort of, and in that respect, this idea that Sotha Sil sees the proper functioning of Nirn as a nameless, all-encompassing shape. The problem that the reason why this is me struggling with this is because clockwork cannot be you can't have a blob and call it clockwork. You can't have what's the shit in Evangelion, HCL or whatever. the big LCL or whatever it was. I can't remember.
Unless this whole text is just trying to describe a solid state hard drive in terms of clockwork.
I have to look this up now.
It strikes me as a callback to the
LCL, Tang. Yeah, that's right.
The tension between the Mer view of reality and the human view of reality, where the Mer are saying let's go back up, let's rejoin, let's become eternal spirits and leave these fractured separate pieces behind, and men represented by Akatosh are like, no, let's keep the world and be proud of our individual little fragmented selves.
Yeah, and that's kind of where, the I don't know. I guess I'm just saying that I think when you write about clockwork and you use things like pistons and gears and mainsprings and all that kind of stuff, you are labeled. There are names. Things have to have a purpose and they have to have a function, but I guess what we're talking about is some kind of a vague state where like something can have a function and be individualized but not be classified, I guess.
Well,
Yeah,
the
Does that make
individual
sense?
gear is nothing without being part of the machine that it works in. Its name becomes immaterial when it loses its function outside of the machine.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's almost not identifiable as separate from the
Yeah.
machine.
Hmm.
Yeah,
It's yeah,
it may be
exactly.
called a
Well,
gear.
it is performing a function, but it is not
yeah,
identifiable as it's still it. If you look at what it is, it's part of the thing. Yeah.
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 Well, that's you gotta squint a lot, I think, to make that work.
Yeah.
And then in the Gold Road quest, Athelia says something about the world working as it was intended to, which is that all mortals are slaves in each one of the functions that they do, whether they're having babies or plowing fields, is part of the design and serves to keep reality whole.
Hmm.
And so
Mm.
that kind of echoes the gear and pinion, do
Mhm.
your job kind of thing.
Yep. Stay in your lane.
Yeah.
Yeah, in which case that just reminds me of the idea of the principles of the universal plot, which is begetting.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Which
Mhm.
makes me wonder: is this a case of it's not just trying to reshape the world; it's trying to tell a different meta narrative of Mundus altogether.
Right.
It's
Right.
trying to find an entirely different way of conceptualizing how things relate.
Hmm.
It's not an enantiomorph cycle, which is the basic pattern of all Mundus.
Sure.
Um, it's trying to be something else simply because you're getting rid of the basic foundations upon which all of these things function.
Well, and in a world made out of metaphor, if you change the story, you change the world.
Exactly.
So, of course, the next paragraph. There is only one name that is not a name. Set, the convergent clockwork god whose will pumps like a piston. Ooh, in into both then and after. Sotha Sil, father of mystery, whose heart drives the wheels eternal and whose blood oils the all axle.
You don't say.
Yeah.
Mm.
So
At this point, Morvain is just fangirling,
yeah,
basically.
a little bit. I assume that it says SI. I assume that's actually supposed to be Sil.
Yeah.
Uh,
Um,
or SI as in Civi, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The divine engine whose mind merges they and we and births the Nern ensuing. Is that memory? Is that who we're supposed to be talking about here? Nern ensuing?
No, well, no, that's Nern ensuing is the Nern to come. So making that out of memory doesn't quite work.
Well, memory does show up later.
Yeah, but
You
memory
know.
is about the past.
Thunder Angel 27, thanks for your Prime sub. I appreciate you.
Yeah.
Where do we know is memories in this text, right?
Not really.
No.
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't okay. So where do we see that?
Coda, as far as I'm aware.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. No.
Because
And I think Love Letter to the Fifth Era. I think that's it.
Since she shows up, since Memno Lee shows up in the 9 coruscations, the ESO text that talks about the Magna Gi,
Mhm.
I am wondering if we're going to be seeing more of her in the future somewhere.
It would be interesting.
Yeah, bro, I don't know.
Yeah.
Is that how that shit's pronounced? Memno Lee?
Oh, I have no.
I don't know either.
I have no
It's-
fetching idea.
It's
Also, is it Magna Gi or Magna Gay?
I'm right? I don't know.
Okay.
Magna Gu.
Yeah. One thing that I do want to do before we dive on, the idea of pumping like a piston into both then and after. So it's doing both things at once. It's being part of both then and after.
Mhm.
It feels like this is again this is an echo of Sotha Sil as the as the the tribune of Azura. I was trying to think of what the opposite of anticipation was, and I don't think there's a word for it.
Yeah.
So he's sort of echoing her themes in this, which is sort of what I'm seeing with that. And we have the all axle. I'm assuming is just the tower, simply because the axle of everything. I can't see it as anything else. That might be far too simple.
Cordy, are we going to do Magna Queer? Is that it? So, blah, 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 in births and ensuing, lesser wills are wisps of smoke, born and lost in a sea of endless sky, lost children whose freedom is death. So, I mean, that's just shit talk, ain't it? Lesser wills is like, like everybody else is bullshit, Yeah. Born and lost in a sea of endless sky. That sounds a lot like, a phosphorescent mirror of the sky, Yeah. Lost children whose freedom is death. Ooh. For what is freedom, child of the tribunal? They kind of, wait a minute. We're talking directly to, so this text is written specifically for tribunal members? For tribunal practitioners. My dad could beat up your dad a little bit, Felix.
Well,
yeah.
Well, child of the tribunal. That just could be a general expression to the Dunmer nation.
Okay. The counter lever to slavery. No. Have you not heard of the words in sequence? The chrononymic will is the pendulum that swings only once.
Yeah.
To swing, it cannot do otherwise. To swing twice would break one intention from another and prove the blasphemy of two.
It's the sound of one hand clapping.
You think that's what it is? I'm thinking a chrononymic will is what they're saying is the chrononymic will swings once. It goes in one direction.
Yeah, linear.
Okay.
Yeah, it's linear. It goes from beginning to end. It cannot then go back the other direction again.
Because that would undo both the going forward and the going back.
Yeah.
And therefore would be,
Special text available only on the Tribunal Patreon. I thought it was this special text that you get if you order the deluxe version of the Kalpa. It's the collector's edition Kalpa. That's when you get this.
And Felix has beaten me to it. The arrow of time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I
something
agree.
else. Yeah. So that's sort of a way of saying.
Cereal.
So the will. If we go back to the top,
Drink more Ovaltine. What the fuck?
What? Yeah. But going back to the idea of the kind of the will of Sotha Sil as the chrononymic will. If the chrononymic will is the pendulum that swings only once, and if we're saying the pendulum that swings only once is the arrow of time, then basically we're saying that Sotha Sil is purely an agent to make sure that time happens properly, or it's going into incredibly deterministic terms which sort of mirrors some of the things that Sotha Sil says himself. That you cannot escape chains of causality unless you're a prisoner. So it's just a case of making sure that the chains of causality are as oiled as possible and as comfortable as possible, and everything just happens. That this is all inevitable. Everything that happens was meant to happen. Deal with it.
So he's essentially trying to replace Akatosh's hourglass with a watch.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's safe. I think that, like, at the end of the day, I'm wondering if a big part, if not the entire part, of Sotha Sil's attempt here is to replace Akatosh as like an inferior timekeeping system, and to just say, look, this dragon shit ain't working.
Yeah.
Discrete. Yeah, thank you. Empirical discrete units. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
We're switching from integer to decimal, and it's just a floating point of much more precision. It's very Dio. Yes, it is. You're right, Torter. Yeah, it is.
Yep.
Yeah.
I don't know to what extent it's supported by the lore, but my impression has always been that Sotha Sil is trying to mantle the Aedra to replace them. And I feel like the Clockwork City is his attempt to switch himself out for Akatosh, which makes me, and I think I've said this to you guys before, it makes me wonder where his hands went and if he used his forearms to construct the Clockwork City, since the Aedra made the world out of themselves.
Mm.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, just to prove the blasphemy of two, I think this is, I reject your cloven duality with a hammer. This is, as Padme is illusion, so too is the named will. For what is choice if not chaos? What is free will if not the lack of order, vulgar, and triumphant? I think we get where this is coming from, right? If free will exists, then everything is crazy and random and nothing is planned, which is scary. The true wheels spin clockwise, ever clockwise. In the choice is delusion. Give yourself to the purity of unity, for in the end you cannot do otherwise. So that this is an argument against free will by somebody who is. I think Akatosh's nature allows for free will in ESO, but in a strictly linear. Oh God.
Yeah,
I don't have the Doctor Who quote memorized, but it's in a strictly linear sense, free will does not exist because everything is already laid out. That's the advantage of clockwork, is that if you build everything right, nothing goes wrong and everything goes exactly as planned.
Yeah, you missed out a line in there.
I did?
Yeah, the true wheel spin clockwise, ever clockwise. In the unity of Nern ensuing, each belongs to all, and all belong to none save Tamriel final. Welcome to the house of we.
Yeah. So lay down your cheap burdens, child. Shall I do thus? Such choice is a delusion. Okay, that's where.
Yep.
This is reminding me of Jiggaleg.
Sort of. We never really got a good example of what Jiggaleg's whole thing was.
Well, but there is the obsession with order over any kind of individuality sort of strikes me that way.
And wasn't there a library where everything that would ever happen was supposedly written down? And was that not Jiggalag's library or something? Am I totally misremembering that?
Yes, that is part of when Sheogorath realized that that he was never going to be Jiggaleg again, he destroyed the library, but he didn't kill the librarian, so the librarian is sitting there with no purpose forever.
Yeah, so there is that idea that there is a deterministic universe underneath all of the stuff within Tamriel, that no matter how it's dressed up, there is another being that recognizes that it's deterministic, and then went insane in the knowing to bring us back to that particular quote.
Well, and then I mean the truth wheels spin clockwise ever clockwise is because, that just means Sotha Sil's not an ambi-turner. When it gets to the end of the runway, you can only turn right. Yeah. Oh.
Yeah, that's what the truth and secrets means.
Thank you, Tordu. Thank you.
Lander.
Yeah. Yes. Time is a strict progression of cause to effect, but actually, in a non-linear, not subjective viewpoint, it's more like a big ball of wibbly wobbly timey stuff. Yeah, and I think that's the kick about like. So there's been a lot of discussion recently in sort of like, I think a lot of people who sort of like me, who kind of casually follow science blogs and stuff, the sort of casual scientist and Twitter and everything has been like, that community has been talking about the existence of free will and whether or not brain theory and a number of other things that they're talking about in physics negate the idea of free will. Neuroscientists have been talking about this for a while in terms of a person being chemically or biologically programmed to react certain ways, and that if you can, there have been experiments, not some intentional, some accidental, where if people's immediate ability to create short-term memory is removed, and they will repeat themselves over and over and over again. And if you keep giving them the same input, they will keep responding in exactly the same way, which, of course, raises questions about, like I said, are we just machines reacting to stimuli the way that we've been programmed to, or is there this idea of a free will? Quantum brain cell interactions, I haven't heard of that one.
Yeah,
and
the stuff that I've heard is something like they measured sort of response times to stimuli, and then what the brain function is, and tying that to when a person decides a thing, and the brain function that represents that decision is there before they've registered the decision. Is the way that I remember it.
So they're consciously the conscious decision to make a decision, but the conscious act to make a decision happens after it biologically occurs.
Yeah, unless consciousness precedes itself.
Right. Yeah.
Which is also another possibility.
Which is an interesting, and like, philosophy majors have, and metaphysics people have been arguing this kind of shit back and forth all the time.
Yep.
I think the main thing that people need to be worried about is not do we have free will, but does it matter? And is it something to worry about if we don't? Like, we'll never know what would have happened if we had free will, because you can't choose to do something 2 different times,
Yeah, it's the same argument I make about when you start presenting predestination in theology circles. Yeah, you can't act as though you don't have free will. There is no physical way to do that.
Owain doesn't want free will. He wants paid will. He wants pay to win will. Yeah. I want microtransaction will.
There's always so much stuff going on in subconscious terms that we can't be aware of. So tracking free will even is difficult because, you mean talk about making the decision before you realize you've made the decision, and that's all based on subconscious input and how we are, gut reacting to things before, and then we, according to our biases, assign reasons and justifications after the fact.
Yeah. And so at the end of the day, the answer, I think that, like James was saying, it doesn't really matter.
No.
You can't observe free will, or you can't observe yourself externally to determine if there's free will or not. You're just going to make the decision that you made anyway, and you're going to think whether you thought whether you actually made it or not doesn't matter, because you think you did.
Yeah, you cannot sufficiently remove yourself from your own consciousness to make that determination. Right,
so it doesn't matter. Free will doesn't exist, but the universe is inherently random, so there's no such thing as destiny. Well, that's just it, Tordir. Then you take on the secondary question of, is the universe also predetermined? Could we predict it if we had measurements fine enough to do so? And because that's a different thing entirely,
That's
do we call it random because we can't step back far enough to see the pattern?
That's my understanding of modern chaos theory, more or less. It's the idea of that there are certain preconditions that we just can't observe, but they do exist. But they do exist somewhere, and it's chaos theory is the idea of understanding where that state of indeterminate preconditions applies. Yeah, and how. So, and what that means for predictive modeling and such.
Yeah. So what is Volume 2 suggesting here? That Sotha Sil is dissatisfied with the way that time works and randomness in the world. Is that fair to say?
I think it's a an evangelical piece almost.
Yeah, it certainly is at points. Yeah.
The key phrase is the child of the tribunal. That tells you who it's speaking to. And if you look at the end of it, the sort of, shall I do thus? Such choice is delusion. Give yourself to the pursuit of unity, for in the end you cannot do otherwise. Yeah. It's kind of, you may as well join the winning team now because you're going to anyway.
Which doesn't Doesn't hold up in the whole free will thing.
No.
If there's no free will,
Not
then
so
why are
much.
you asking people to do anything? They're going to do what they're going to do.
No. Yeah.
Yeah.
This text, of course, is secondhand, but we
Mhm.
do get to talk to Sotha Sil at one point, and
Mhm.
he talks about how, if we have to, I look around and I see only unstable walls. If we have to live here, I want to make it as stable as possible for the people who are here.
Mhm.
And I'm wondering if perhaps this emphasis on being a good gear in the machine is part of his, that theme comes through because he's pushing that as part of his way to shore up the walls.
Yeah.
This whole thing will be stronger if we are all unified in our thoughts and our look at it.
Mhm.
And that does kind of track with some other Elder Scrolls things where the more fragmented the consciousness of the people in reality, the jankier that reality is.
Mhm. Which is an easy
Yeah.
solution to come to. I think
Yeah.
part of Vivek's complexity to their philosophy was the idea that everybody should be working against everybody else because Vivek only plays on PvP servers. And and that makes
Yeah.
you level faster, you get tougher that way. I don't know what the thinking was there.
Yeah. Just kind of bring Sotha Sil's actual dialogue into
Yeah.
this, just because I've found it. There's some of the things that he says about choice and determinism from just some quick searching. I am only what time and circumstances made me, son of a lost house, friend to a fallen king. Some will tell you that we are the product of our choices. I've never found that to be the case. And where are we? There was another one in there. That was something along the oh yeah, as I said, we are all of us bound by our nature. Alexia does what she does because she cannot do otherwise. It will not end well, but then even the best endings rarely bring joy. And then another one another one is just a one liner. Others believe in chaos. They think their choices give them agency. I know differently, and yet I find myself hesitating. Am I actually worried my actions lead to failure? So you've got a lot there about hard determinism, that choices don't matter, that it's all going to happen anyway, and yet he's still umming and ahhing about the possibilities of stuff because he's mortal like everyone else.
Yeah.
Well,
he was, and
he was.
Yeah.
He has mortal origins, which is going to do things to the limits of your cognition.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, anyway, so that's volume 2. We'll take on volume 3 in 2 weeks.
Yes.
And I want to thank big thanks to everybody who subbed, and thanks very much to everybody who tuned in. I think volume 3, if we can do it in less than 45 minutes, we'll do 2 volumes in one episode. We'll see. I haven't really been reading ahead, so I'm not really 100% sure how complex things are going to get. There's not like a Sermon 29 hanging over my head. So thanks everybody for tuning in. Everybody, bye.
Bye.
Bye.